radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. Thank you for joining us. Today is May 12th, 2017. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here on the West Coast. I want to tell you that today, while I enjoy having my two guests on a regular basis, we're going to be bringing you updates today about Hanford, which doesn't exactly make me the happiest person in the world because this is grave information. So buckle up and be prepared. I want to welcome Heide, Lambert, and Mimi Gurman to the show. Thank you guys for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So, many people know who's listening to this show that Hanford had a 15, I read the lawsuit yesterday, a 15-foot by 20-foot hole that was collapsed in that we've heard was there for a few days. So why don't one of you guys join in and kind of give us a quick summary, and then update on some of the information that you found.
Miriam, you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, sure. So there was a collapse of Earth, and it's interesting that their lawsuit says 15 by 20. The numbers that started to come out around this have altered so many times. As the days change, the number changes. Originally, it was smaller than 20 by 20. This report says 15 by 20. Now it's 20 by 20. Anyway, there is a plutonium and uranium plant in Hanford, and there were trains that were used in tunnels a long time ago that had highly radioactive fuel rods on them, and the tunnel was so hot eventually that the state had to close down, the government had to close down these tunnels because the radioactivity coming from those tunnels was definitely causing cancers, but they don't say that. What we know about the measurements that were in the tunnel at the time that the tunnels closed years ago, decades ago, was that it was putting out 5 Roentgens an hour, or Roentgens an hour, which is a type of measurement. 1 Roentgen equals 1 rad, and workers are only allowed to receive 5 Roentgens per year, but this tunnel was putting out, at the time of closure, 5 Roentgens per hour. So finally, with the support of scientists, they finally closed these tunnels down. And that takes us to a few days ago. After years, decades of radioactivity down in that tunnel being closed in, pinging on the wooden beams and the soil, degrading the structure of the tunnel itself, and I think vibrations of earthquake clusters in Bremerton and in the Hanford area. The vibration finally just caved in this area of, some say 20 by 20, This lawsuit says 15 by 20, this hole. And when that hole of soil collapsed in on itself in the tunnel, radiation came out of the tunnel that was being supposedly secured inside the tunnel. But the word that everybody received immediately was, there are no radiation releases, which is absolutely impossible, and that everybody's fine, while they sent 3,000 people home and locked down others in the area to make them not leave their buildings and refused them the ability to drink or eat due to the radiation levels that they kept telling us didn't exist.
You know what's
So
really
we
annoying
have
about that too is that in a month from now, when those people are sick, they're going to say it's not related to today's event.
Right. So while they were telling us that everything was fine, they were using protocol that everything was not fine because they knew immediately that nothing was fine. So I'll leave it there and we can keep talking.
So I would like to say that growing up at Hanford, the Purex plant, the 200 area, is one of the most talked about spaces, similar to the tank farms, because the tank farms, of course, are dangerous because they're leaking and they don't really know what's all in these tanks. The Purex is the same thing. The Purex are these tunnels like Miriam's talking about. There's multiple tunnels, some as long as 30 miles long. And these tunnels, no one really knows what's all in them. And they're actually like the most contaminated. It was the stuff that they made in the 40s that they knew they couldn't keep in open air trenches like the rest of the waters, the cooling waters. These were the rods. These are like the most radioactive equipment. And so they stuck them in these tunnels. So for this to happen is telling us that this is going to happen a lot more. This is just the beginning. And I'm really skeptic. I believe this has been happening. I'm under the belief that these tunnels have been caving in for the last decade. And the only difference now is that the employees feel empowered enough to actually speak out about it. And so that, to me,
what makes you think that there's been this happen before where they've had these sinkholes? We had reports of this before in the past?
No, but because these tunnels are so long and they're so like primitive. They're like mining tunnels, like Miriam said.
They are
wood and concrete. They're just like a mining. They had no clue, really. When they built these tunnels, they still didn't know what they were up against. They just knew that if you were near it long enough, you would die.
Well, this lawsuit that we read yesterday on the air basically talked about the wood in 1991. They found that the wood was degraded by 30%. It only had 60% structural integrity.
Right.
So
and when they built those tunnels, they also weren't admitting that they were on fault lines. So what Miriam said about earthquakes, we're looking at 60 years of earthquakes happening and shifting, plus the radiation's chemical reaction to the soils and the wood. I mean, this is what Miriam and I and you are up against, is that this is an aging infrastructure, and Hanford's the first. So when Hanford goes, that's showing us that everywhere is about to go, because this is the same kind of school of thought throughout the whole world of how to manage this waste.
Yes. Completely. You're
So
completely right.
The thing that I was talking about earlier, if you're at a nuclear plant, as soon as you flip the switch, when a nuclear plant is built, as soon as you flip the on switch, the very first second that you flip that on switch, all of a sudden there's radiological bombardment within the entire structure of that nuclear power plant, right? And the nuclear bombardment, the radiological bombardment affects concrete, it affects wires, it affects pipes, it affects nuts and bolts that are the security system of making sure that the water is cool enough, or that trapdoors open when they're supposed to open, or that, the electrical current that is supposed to flow through there to make sure everything else is going, it starts to decay from that moment, from when you flip the switch. A nuclear power plant basically can last, let's just say 20 years, okay? And at that point, whatever it's licensed for, the licensing is for far longer than the durability of the plant itself.
Now,
so,
yes.
Right. So let's just apply that. Let's just apply that to the tunnels that are going, that are under Hanford. These tunnels have been there, and the radiological warfare that's below the earth there has been there for decades. And what it's doing is the very same thing. It's bombardment against wood, against soil. Okay, so the structure of let's just say compacted soil, right? It's no longer viable because it's been hit so hard with radiation, which is so damaging. And so they keep telling us, Hanford Reserve, it's the size of Rhode Island. So the size of Rhode Island at Hanford is all under attack and has been under attack under the earth for decades. And now it's caving in on itself, if it hasn't already, which is what Heidi's saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. This is just the first time they've seen a big gaping hole, in other words.
Oh, I just argue that, Lonnie. I think
really?
The times they share it with us. I think a lot of things happen at Hanford, and if they can get away with not sharing it, they haven't shared it. But there is a culture change happening at Hanford right now with the workers, and it's about them feeling more less threatened so that they can speak out. But I wanted to go back to what Miriam was saying about this, accelerated corrosion is kind of what I hear her saying, that the radiation creates an accelerated corrosion. And I think that's really interesting because all of the pictures and things that I've seen of radiation waste is that it's like a salt. It's essentially like a salt. And so when you think about how corrosive the salt is, like say to a boat in the ocean, I mean, it's going to be multiple times more corrosive than that.
Well, I think I've heard some, Lorraine Murray talk about this, that this is actually called the Wigner effect, or the Wigner effect, as she calls it. Mm-hmm. That it basically, that's why we're seeing all these weird airplane, Christina Consolo has a whole page on this about all of this, is you see all these weird airplane accidents, like the windshield just came out of the window, or they had trouble with their landing gear, or we're seeing a bunch of small minor incidences because it's breaking down the metal because they're flying up in radioactivity. It's like,
well, I think those make a difference because such a small thing takes an airplane out of the sky, and so then we're like, well, how did that airplane come out of the sky? But when you're talking about a nuclear plant like CGS that's creating this, we don't ever hear about the nuts and the bolts of the security system or anything. I mean, the NRC will close things down to change a filter or change different things, but you don't really hear about how much is really aging that plant. It's something that they want to avoid talking about. Like Miriam said, they license them for 50 years?
Well, they're supposed to be 20 years. They've extended them to 40, then to 60, now 80. Now the licensees are asking for 80-year lives.
Right.
That means that they know that they have, they haven't kept them. The thing is, you were completely correct. They are all completely corrosive. They have done nothing to really, the complete gross negligence by the nuclear industry is just really a crime against humanity and our planet.
Well, I think at this point, Washington is feeling like it's a crime against Washington. When I saw that there was the lawsuit with Governor Inslee against the Department of Energy, my feelings are that the state got paid to put Hanford there without knowing. It's kind of like all the native reservations. Nobody knew what they were agreeing to. Right. And so they agree to store this waste thinking they're going to bury it and be done with it. And then instead, it just keeps coming back. And now I think Washington State's starting to understand we're stuck with this for a really long time. And if we don't try to manage this better, it's going to end the world, that this is dangerous and it's expensive.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about some of the PR that's gone down over the last couple of days at Hanford, because it's pretty damn egregious and it works great. We know now that there were, I think it's 53 or 56 truckloads of dirt that were brought in. One of the things that happened 2 days ago was there were photos, and I don't know, and I'm serious when I say this, I don't know if this was a photo op, like a photo, that's the wrong word, stock photo of somewhere else. But there were pictures of, there was a guy on a tractor and there were some people supposedly determining what was going on with the hole. Okay, none of these people had radioactive protective gear on, and that's the first thing I saw. First of all, why are there people there right after they brought a robot in? You know, we still don't have measurements to let us know how hot the release was. The DOE has those measurements, but of course they're not going to release those. Fukushima didn't release theirs, and they chopped off a whole bunch of zeros for 2.5 years. So I don't know if we'll ever get a reading on what was let out. Eventually we might, maybe even from a worker. But that aside, there were workers there with no protective gear on. If that's the case, then Hanford again is negligent against workers for putting them in a life-threatening, cancer-causing situation. Now, if this photo was a stock photo, what it means is we have no idea what any engineers were doing, who the engineers were. Were these contractors contracted from Bechtel or from CH2M Hill? Who knows? Those are the two main contractors for Hanford. I'm guessing that they were subcontracted from them, but I don't know. And you don't know either. We don't know anything still. So then what I want to know, as somebody who's interested in radioactive readings, is how much did they stick that robot down in the tunnel to find out how hot the tunnel was? At one point, decades ago, we knew that it was releasing 5 Roentgens an hour. What do we know today? We had a moment where we could have thrown a robot down there to find out. I don't think they put the robot in the tunnel because they didn't want to know. Because if they knew how hot the tunnel was, they would also know. This is physics, folks. If there's a hole all of a sudden that was blocking, previous to the hole, that was blocking a space that didn't have, airflow, and all of a sudden there's a hole, the airflow that's down in the tunnel is going to come up with whatever is in it, right? We also don't know if particles came up. We have no idea if people breathed in particles, which is a lung cancer fact. And so again, these are things that we have no idea. So in the meantime, they tell us that 53 or 56 truckloads of soil came in. Where'd that soil come from? Did that soil come from, let's just say, Site 300? Site 300 is a supposedly remediated site, which is about, I don't know if I'm getting the yardage right. I was there last year with my Geiger counter. Site 300 is like maybe 200 yards from the Hanford sign. And it's supposedly remediated, meaning that all of the radiological soil and radioactive, whatever was there is gone. My Geiger counter went nuts when I got into Site 300. So I walked deeper into the field, silly me, but I did because I couldn't help myself. And it's hot at Site 300. Did they take the soil from Site 300 because it's already been quote unquote remediated? So in their minds, it's clean, and dump that into the tunnel? We know that the tunnel has extremely flammable materials in it. We know it's extremely radioactive. Who are the engineers who decided, first of all, that it was okay? How did they do the testing to make sure that the workers weren't going to cave in when those 53 truckloads of soil came in? That's heavy. That's a constant vibration over an area. What, you're going to take 24 hours and figure all this out? You at Hanford, who have taken decades to do absolutely nothing correct? It's all PR. I'm infuriated because we can't know anything, not a thing, until we know those measurements.
And instead, they just tell us, rest assured, everything is safe, everything is okay. And I like the point that you're bringing about bringing those truckloads of dirt. How did they know that the rest of that tunnel that's 30 miles long or whatever length it is isn't going to collapse while they're there working on it? Right. It's totally like a show pony. It feels,
especially if it has been.
It has felt like a show pony to me this entire time, you guys, and I know I'm skeptical, but I really believe they only tell us about the disasters when they need budget money. It's always about the budget. And this time, it's not about the tank farms. They're like, okay, we understand the VIT plant is just a fucking mess, so let's just not bring it up. Let's just not even talk about the tank farms, the VIT plant. and divert it to this other problem that we have.
Oh my God. It's like,
And then,
I mean, what you're suggesting, they're playing whack-a-mole just to squeeze out money every time they want extra money.
Yeah,
They just play whack-a-mole, like, oh, we're working on this, and then like, oh my God, look at this, we need more money, and then, oh my God, look at this, we need more money.
Yeah, and they have an accident, the people get all upset, and then the people actually generate that movement to the government to give them more money. So then they get more of a budget and they get more money, but then we see them just waste this money, like Miriam's saying, in even the fix. Like, what kind of fix is this? This is not a fix. To fill the hole with dirt, to me, is just covering up. Just covering up.
That's what I've been calling it. It's covering up the cover-up. And it's exactly, it's almost ironic that they would choose to do it that way because it's such a blatant cover-up of covering up the hole, you know? And yet everybody...
I'm sorry, go ahead, Miriam, I'm sorry.
I was just, everybody still, you know, is saying, yeah, but there was no radiation released. Because they don't know better, right? So they'd rather believe this ridiculous notion, you know?
Governor Jay Inslee put out the most offensive. I had to respond to him on Twitter. It was so annoying. I'm so happy that we have great workers at Hanford and everyone's safe. I'm like, really? So they're not safe. They're not even, you're asking these people to go into an unsafe environment and you're not even acknowledging it. That was just the infuriating part. It's not like, oh, we have an emergency, put your emergency suits on and we're concerned about your health. It's like, oh, they fixed it and they're fine. Look at them.
Well,
the complete disregard for life.
I so am curious as to who the contractors were that had the dump truck who are standing out next to the hole. Like, we need to know if those people really exist, because I'm with Miriam and calling bullshit. It probably never happened. It's just a stock photo.
I think I wouldn't doubt that they did endanger everybody's lives with no, hazmat suits on, proper gear, and not doing any kind of soil conduct, whatever they do, to make sure the structure's okay. I wouldn't be surprised if all that happened and they said, let's just cover it up, and took no measurements of the tunnel. But there's another piece of me that feels that they had to know how hot things were, because in order to, they never send everybody home like that. So in order to do that, they had to have known measurements. And that's the part where my logical brain says somebody knew. Because of course somebody knew. Everything about this place is about radioactivity, right? The thing that's not lacking there, that's only lacking for us, is how much radioactivity in measurements is going out. I'm such a science nerd about this, because it's the most important piece. This is the shit that kills people, and animals and plants and everything else. So, yeah, I don't even know what I was just saying.
But that goes back to them sending people home, okay, to me, again, is part of this show, because even though it's expensive for them to send people home because they're paying them for work not done, but for me to look at this and think they sent people home because they were worried about their health, my bullshit detector just goes off. I'm like, there's no way. They don't care about people's health. That's not what their drive for. That's not what their drive is. But so it makes me think in the 70s, I want to say 78, Hanford came out and released all these papers of how dangerous it was. And it lost a ton of funding. There was still millions of dollars, don't get me wrong, but considering the billions of dollars they spent, this was considered this economic downfall for Hanford. And it was considered a depression, and people couldn't sell their houses, and people were just driving away from their houses. I mean, this is totally documented of happening at Hanford. So this was traumatizing to a lot of people, because the property value, there was that reality of, we're investing next to a nuclear waste site, and, our house might not go up in value. We might lose value. People started to think about real estate a little bit more in the Tri-Cities. So now we're fast forwarding 50 years, and to me, this was kind of initiating that same trauma in the people. The people are very worried about money. They're very driven. The only people who will live there are about money, because there's no reason to live there.
But at the same time, Heidi, lawsuits, people are winning. workers' comp lawsuits are winning. And if Hanford is going to continue to get its $2 billion a year, which it will, if it's going to continue to do that, they cannot knowingly, well, they cannot today, I should say. Today, they cannot affect the lives of 3,000 people in one show of like some collapse. I'm just saying that there's a flip side to what you're saying and there's a truth to what you're saying. But in this case, imagine if 3,000 people were kept there and those numbers come out about how high that radiation was, and I think those numbers will come out, then every single person who wasn't made to go home is going to sue Hanford. You know where that $2 billion is going to go? Bechtel would be put under for that, at least as a contractor there. They don't want to lose that contractorship, and neither does CH2M Hill. So that's why I think that they had to do that to avoid the potential lawsuit that will come once those numbers are out. If they were so fucked up that they didn't tell people to go home knowing what those numbers were, because I know they know what the numbers are. The DOE knows what they are.
Right, but
which means Hanford knows what they
are, then that brings them in fault. Because again, that takes care of what you're saying.
But at least they send people home. At least they send people home, right? If they didn't do that, the lawsuits would be like every single solitary person would take out Bechtel and CH2M Hill.
Right, because it's on.
So I think they did it to avoid a lawsuit, because now they get to say we were responsible. Which is so funny, but they still get to say that, you know. And if they hadn't, they wouldn't.
People who live in Richland and the people who live in West Richland, I mean, there's still people being exposed to that air whichever direction that. I mean, we've seen spikes.
And those people will never win a lawsuit, no matter what, ever,
because they didn't work there. The protection.
So they're not workers
in
there.
Richland. The children are not being kept home from school. They're going to school. Everything is fine. Nobody's in lockdown.
Oh, no, I talked to my sister last night. She said everything's normal in Tri-Cities. She said she doesn't even understand what the big deal, why the press is making such a big deal out of this. There's nothing. People are drinking the water, planning on going to the boat.
They do this no matter what. If Hanford told them that there was a radiological release, they'd still be like, it's kind of good for you. I mean, this is the mentality of these morons who live in that area. It's true, These people don't think that radiation.
I think that they are completely gaslit.
But they're never going to accept that radiation can kill you. They'll be like, yeah, well, so can the sun.
Yes, I've talked to those people.
So I have to tell you, I have this crazy, vivid imagination, and I cannot stop thinking about how these damn trains got in the tunnels. These trains full
That's
of
what I was thinking about. How did they? Where did they come from?
Some poor person drove those trains in that tunnel, and then they went home and died. You know what I mean? Like, it's to me, the whole Hanford site is such an atrocity of how they've treated people, and there's no responsibility, there's no accountability. That I guess is why I can't take it seriously that they sent these people home. Because. I have seen.
We didn't have lawsuits back then.
They didn't have lawsuits. They didn't have the ground that they have now. The whistleblowers do have more than I've ever seen in my life. And even then, it's an incredible struggle that they go through when they do whistleblow. And I support them 100%. And I hope that people in the Tri-Cities will. I truly believe that this became an emergency because of the workers. I believe that Bechtel and CH2M Hill knew. That's what I was saying with you, Lonnie, earlier. This has been a problem. I'm sure this has been a problem before, and it will continue to be a problem. To me, the only difference is that the workers had the courage to speak out, and they're the ones that called it.
Right. I totally agree, Heidi, and I think that had the tank farms have been releasing super toxic gases for years. I spoke to one of the main reporters out there about this, Annette, and she's like, "It's been going on for years. You just haven't heard about it, with people getting sick, and trying to make their cases heard, but they weren't heard." But again, fortunately for them, there are now, lawyers listening and willing because the lawyers have to be willing too to take on the nuclear cartel when they take on clients who have been, I want to say genocided by Hanford, and it takes a lot of balls to do that, to go up against the nuclear cartel, because the chances of them coming after you as a lawyer not protecting the assets of CH2M Hill and Bechtel those are the things that people get killed for, But the fact is, we do know now for the last 10 years that the workers who are getting such serious brain damage and neuromuscular diseases from the tank farm area, other workers are seeing that this is serious. Workers who haven't yet gotten sick, but now they're seeing, oh my God, this is a reality. And I think it's true, Heidi, that now they're much more willing to say, we got a problem here, and step up. But the whistleblowers will take a while to really come out in numbers. I think we know what we know so far for the few people who we still don't know yet, who have been speaking to Susanna Frame and to Tom Carpenter, because they know where to go.
Well, Susanna Frame, for our listeners, if you're on Twitter, you should follow Susanna Frame, SUSANNAH Frame, FREME. She's at King 5 up in Seattle. And she has done really tremendous groundbreaking work. To be honest, she has stood up and refused to sit down and shut up. Like, I'm sure she has been threatened, cajoled, everything you can imagine. And yet she is there in the middle of the night reporting and pressing people. And I saw her in a report. She was talking to Governor. I follow Governor Inslee because I find that completely offensive, that this governor refuses to acknowledge that this is a catastrophe, that he's willing to just parrot out the lies of the nuclear industry. And, don't worry, everybody's fine. Nothing's wrong. Our wonderful workers, just the workers working there are working in danger. I was thinking about you, Heidi, when that happened, when that thought occurred to me. When these people go to work, they must know they're in danger, right?
No. I had a neighbor.
No.
So I want to say two things. The first thing is the state of Washington is the most pro-nuke state in our union. They have nukes from the ocean all the way to Hanford, right? This is the birthplace of nukes.
What?
So we're talking about a serious.
Oh yeah, Bremerton.
Bremerton, the nuclear submarines. That's what's in this tunnel is a nuclear submarine. They figured it out, brought it in on a train, drove it through the state, and brought it into the tunnel. So this is we're talking 60 to 70 years of a culture, of a mindset that it's safe. And the other thing is that with that mindset, when you go to Eastern Washington, they will tell you that they are the smartest population in the United States. They'll tell you per capita there are more scientists living in Eastern Washington than anywhere else in the U.S. And so I don't know about you guys, but when you hang out with someone who says they know everything, they usually are pretty dumb. Right? I mean, that's that mentality there. They know everything.
Well, the fact that these people are saying they know everything and yet live in the most radioactive zone is everything right there. We are so smart, and we live in the most radioactive zone in North America.
So to me, you guys, the Washington State got conned by the federal government to put Hanford there. Then they have it. Now it's aging. Now they're realizing that it's really it's big. It's so much bigger than $2 billion a year. And they need more money. And right now the feds we all know what the federal government's doing. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about regulations.
No. They didn't care before Trump was in. Yeah.
Exactly.
So Inslee's suing because he's crapping his pants that he's going to get stuck with this. And the state of Washington is going to have to – they can't afford this. They can't. I mean, none of us can afford nukes. There's just no way. You know what I mean? We're talking 10,000 years of this. Even if it's remediated, like Miriam said, they call it remediated.
There is no remediation.
Yeah, they just turned the dirt over. There's no remediation. And so go ahead.
There's a couple times a year in Richland, and I actually thought about running for it. There's the Hanford Advisory Board called HAB, and there are lots of different kinds of people on that board, and it's a really good board because community involvement is crucial on the board. So they have community from Eastern Oregon. This is like the only place where we actually get to participate. There's residents from Oregon, there are residents from Washington, and then, of course, there's the Department of Ecology from Washington, which is super, they talk out of both sides of their mouths. I have a big problem with the DOE in Washington. There are people from the Department of Energy, there are the tribes, and I'm probably missing somebody, the NRC. So if people want to actually go, these HAB meetings are fascinating. I've been to 3 of them, and every single issue that ever comes up between one meeting to the next meeting comes up at these meetings. Like, you can bring up something. Well, you can't if you're not on the board, but you can ask somebody from the board if they will. And these things get talked about, and they get talked about quite seriously. Now, that doesn't mean that the DOE doesn't shut shit down, and make the things that make sense actually happen. But you still get to be there and participate and push for the cleanup to occur. And you get to call them out for this kind of stuff that is happening. So I'm just telling people that there is a place for us to go and participate. And you can participate as a non-member of the board. You can go, and they give you time to, not a lot of it, like 3 minutes, to voice your thoughts,
Can people go to the Department of Ecology website? Is that how we find where to go?
No, you look up HAB, the Hanford Advisory Board.
Okay.
Instead, yeah. And they're fascinating meetings. I'm going to go to the next one because I want to talk about this. I want the measurements.
Mary, when you find out about it, will you post it on No Nukes Northwest on Facebook so that
for sure
other people can see when it is, and including myself, and where? Because sometimes
and if
cities, right? Or in Portland, or are they always in Tri-Cities?
No, they're not doing Portland anymore because we showed up. And activists showed up, and they don't want to come here anymore.
They didn't like the geisha of death showing up, and
they didn't like any of us. So they're like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So they're going to make us drive 3 hours to get to them.
And they meet in Seattle.
No, they meet in Richland. They mostly meet in Richland. Yeah.
Wow.
Occasionally they'll do if they need community permissions for certain things, then they have to go to different communities. But in general, the HAB meetings themselves are in Richland.
Well, most of those people work in Richland and work around Hanford. I mean, it is community based. But I wanted to bring something else up too, to go backwards for a second, Lonnie. When you said the people who work there know where they're working. And I wanted to tell you that's not true. And my proof of that is I had a neighbor, a really young family, and they had like 2 kids, and they were working on having more, and they're all happy, and they're from the East Coast, and his parents owned a pretty successful construction site, and he went to college for engineering, and he wanted to go work somewhere before he went and took over his dad's construction site. And so he applied at Bechtel. And he got hired to work at the largest construction site in the world. And he was so excited to have that opportunity. And it paid a lot of money. And they paid to move them and buy them a house and just all these perks. They couldn't believe how lucky they were. And guess where they got their job? It was at Hanford. The VIT plant, they don't call it the vitrification plant. They call it the biggest construction site in the world. So it's really common, actually, to have people who go out there and work there every day and not even know really where they're working. They don't even really understand it. And the whole Hanford reservation, Miriam keeps saying it's the size of Rhode Island. But when you live there, they give you this belief that it's only like a 10-mile area that's actually dangerous, and the rest of it is fine. And so they give you this impression like it has to be 500 square miles because 490 of those miles are buffer zone from the danger. And there's actually a highways that go through Hanford. When I lived there, I couldn't not take these highways. They're the route to get to places. If you live in Richland and you want to go north to Moses Lake or Othello, which lots of people do, they will go and drive a highway through Hanford. And in that highway, you feel like you're out in wilderness.
Yeah.
It's all this sage and birds, and you can see elk.
Feels like the desert, kind of. You know what I mean? I went out there, and it's
you get to a
so
bridge,
beautiful.
And people are loading their boats, and they're fishing in the freaking river. Like it's asinine how blind everyone is.
But you know that's a direct take from when things began at Hanford. You know, in the 30s when things began. The idea and the law there was that no one would know what another person does. So you had cubicles. You were in a separate situation, a separate room, a separate cubicle, a separate something, completely cut off from what the person next to you was doing if they were doing something different from you, so that you couldn't know that what you were doing was creating a bomb. Yeah, and that philosophy is the philosophy that is woven into Hanford still today, so that you don't know that you're working on this so-called remediated space that hasn't been remediated because, according to my little Geiger counter, it's hot, you know?
And Mary, you're not allowed to go home and tell your partners about it. You can't go home and talk about it. You can't go to your family barbecue and say, oh, at work I did this or that. If you get caught talking about what you do, you'll be fired. And that secrecy was even more severe where my dad in the 70s said people just straight up disappeared. It was very common to have scientists from other countries, really common. My dad actually worked with a lot of Russian scientists because of probably Chernobyl. In that time, scientists would learn things, and he said they just disappear. You know, so
this whole industry has, I mean, this is the most outrageous, murderous industry I've ever heard of in my life. It's unbelievable. The culture of denial, underreporting, gross negligence is what caused this recent accident. They knew in this lawsuit, it says they were directed in 1991. They were given 10 years to fix it. They never even looked at it again. And that's because of nuclear bombardment. They know how quickly bombardment attacks whatever the structure is and every single structure around it. We can't keep tanks at the tank farm in one piece because of the bombardment that's going on to the metals around it. It's all the same, whether you're talking about metal, plastic, soil, wood, it doesn't matter. Water, it doesn't matter. Radiation, hot radiation will go through it and fuck it up. And that is why, you know, people should be mad. And that's why people should be really mad when nuclear power plants stay online even after their licensing is up for renewal. There's not one single nuclear power plant should ever have been renewed, because the time that it should have been shut down was years before that. I mean, in my view, they never should have been, built in the first place. But aside from that, there happens to be a public meeting today. I was looking to see if I could post this. There happens to be one today at 5:30, and this is what it's asking for. It's a 60-day public period to support a requested Class 2 permit modification to the Hanford Waste Treatment and Immobilization Plant Dangerous Waste Permit. And that's today. Do they want to be receiving more waste? Is that what this one's for? Because they often want to receive more waste.
Yep.
Let's see.
Miriam,
it usually says.
Did the Columbia Generating Plant, the CGS or Columbia Generating Station, did they close down when Hanford closed down? Did you ever find out if that?
Nobody will tell me. I cannot even get that info.
Because they probably don't want to tell you they sent them to work, because then it wasn't so dangerous.
They have to, right? Exactly.
So we don't really
Now,
know.
we know that at a nuclear power plant, there's always going to be people, what they call essential workers have to stay. But we don't know if they were all evacuated. And that's part of the PR, too. It's like, well, when you say that everyone was evacuated on the Hanford Reserve, obviously that also means CGS. But why isn't CGS even mentioned?
Yeah, they think of it as very separate. And I also think, of course, they didn't mention it because they don't want people to know there's a working reactor right next to all that waste.
That's right.
So they just didn't say nothing, and no one says nothing.
Right.
Well, so Heidi, based on your theory that this was really it's not like it's not a non-emergency. It's just that this kind of thing happens all the time, and they just decided to pick on it so that they could get more funding, immediate funding.
I know that sounds cynical, but yes, that is what I believe.
Wow.
I don't think so.
I do believe that it is a serious freaking problem, but they've known, like we've all been talking about, they've been knowing this is a problem. So why didn't they fix it before it became this emergency? But why did they wait for the emergency, and why is the emergency happening right now when we're doing budgeting in D.C.?
Well, the interesting thing is that the story's coming out that it's, quote, been there for an unknown time. They don't know how long it's been going on. I'm like,
That's
really?
Right. That's right.
You don't know how long this hole's been there?
And you know what? I do want to say, and I might have said this at the top of your show, I don't know, but we know from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's event list that people have been busted at both CGS and at Hanford for negligence in management in watching over what they're supposed to be doing. I'm talking high-level jobs, okay? So somebody is supposed to be watching, I don't know, is it satellites? Is it a radiation meter that they, and what the events tell us is that the people in these jobs, and of course not everybody, but we have event listings of this is the truth, are drunk, are on opioids, are getting stoned at work. There's bottles of liquor, in their offices because this is such a high stress place, no matter what they want to tell you, that people are just completely narcoed out on their jobs. So if this hole has been there, it is someone's job to know that. It's probably a few people's job to know that. But I'm telling you, man, I mean, we know that people get busted there all the time. And if anything, they just get put on leave,
But that goes back.
And you can't follow up.
People that you're saying are high security or whatever, 98% of the time these are soldiers or veterans. They're very calloused against, if you're going to talk to somebody about the fears or the dangers of nukes, they're going to tell you they're perfectly safe and the government's not going to put them anywhere that's dangerous. And their job's boring. They're just sitting there all night long. Nothing's happening. So they're like, well, who cares if we get drunk and stoned and take pills because nothing's happening. And so they're numb to the dangers. They don't even realize the dangers they're in. But I want to share with you guys, I saw an article in the Spokesman this morning. That's the Spokane newspaper. And it says, Governor Inslee said the enforcement action could help the Department of Energy make an argument to Congress that is much needed for money to get the job done, even in the face of possible budget cuts. So again, whenever Hanford feels vulnerable, they let a little truth out about how dangerous it is. In this exact same article, it talks about how the contractors have everything under control, and even though everything is safe now, we need to prove to DOE that they have 4 permit fines. The state thinks that there's 4 reasons that they had broken their permit, and then mostly it's about timekeeping and doing, like you're saying, taking care of this tunnel in a reasonable time.
That's right.
But again, I just have to keep telling you guys that as I grew up there is these disasters at least monthly, and so many of them are hidden. And I really want to have faith that the workers are getting empowered to speak out and fight against this. But the cynical part of me is like, they're only telling us because they want us to get them more money. This is about this need for money. And I feel like we really need to put pressure on the government that not only do we need money, but we need a different system of scientists. We need a different way of scientists work on this, because Miriam knows, she found out this and told me, the NRC is regulated by the DOE.
That's
And
right.
you know what I mean? This is self-regulated. There's nobody telling these people what
There's
they're
no
doing.
oversight. This is why I'm
There's
going to
no
college. It's
oversight.
all connected to the Price-Anderson Act, the whole philosophy of this nuclear energy is so worth it. Any price is worth paying for us to have it.
Right, and price means people dying.
Death.
That's
Murder,
what
death,
price
kill.
means.
Not just people.
Right.
Our whole biota is
That's
being
right.
murdered.
That's exactly right. Right.
I mean, it is beyond just human beings or creatures. It's everything. We will not even be able to touch the rocks in 200 years.
No.
Right.
It's
hey, you guys,
outrageous.
I have to jump off. I have to go into work. But thank you,
for
Lonnie
joining us. I
and
really
Heide.
appreciate it. Thank you for bringing your knowledge. I hope to snag you back in for another interview. I really love this. I think this is people do need to understand this, what's going on in the Northwest, because Hanford affects everyone. So I'll let you go, and thanks, Mimi, for joining us.
Yeah, Miriam,
thank you so much.
Thanks for having your courage feet on, man.
Both of you too. See you soon.
Okay, bye. Heidi.
Yes.
Okay. So yay, that successfully happened to him. I don't think we disconnected from the radio show. Me and technology, not so much. I am actually a little bit stunned by your hypothesis, but it makes a lot more sense based on all the idiocy. I've been kind of taunting Jay Inslee online. He's like saying the most ridiculous things, though. It's outrageous.
Right, and the idea of, like Miriam said, the stock photo of the people working right next to the hole, it just looks fishy to me. It doesn't feel like it's a. I mean, I agree that it's an accident.
Considering Rick Perry's statement about things are fine, we're going to be, we're finding solutions. This isn't that. It's not that scary. Don't worry about it. We've got the hole. They got a hole, a 20-foot hole they filled in 2 days.
Right.
Can you do that?
And again, it goes back to who's driving ththose trucks. 44 dump trucks. I'm assuming that maybe they used 7 trucks at a time, and they're just rotating them. So they're just driving these trucks, like Miriam said. We know this is super radioactive space, and they're just going to let those trucks get radiated and then go back into the garage and just send those kids, the guys driving them home, and everything's just fine and hunky-dory, And that makes me believe that didn't even ever happen. And I read at one point that they had a tarp over the hole, that they had tarped it. And when I heard that, I thought, that
was one of their options. They did that immediately,
Right, and I'm assuming that was to try to hold some air out or in. But, I always go back to those animals and bugs. They're easily a bird. And actually, Miriam and I had a conversation about this earlier this week about, would wildlife know that this was dangerous? Would it be hot? Would it be cold? Would it have a weird sound? And, my experience with radiation is that it's invisible. You can't sense it. Even if it's hot and those atoms are vibrating like crazy, it maybe feels a little warmer, maybe temperature-wise. I've heard stories of it snowing when things are radiated, so I really don't know what it feels like. But my experience is you don't feel anything. No. And so you have a bird who's flying over this hole, and all of a sudden it decides to go down and eat some grasshoppers that are living next to this hole. And they could have been they could have been dead grasshoppers because they'd already died from the radiation, and the bird is still eating it because it's easy to find. And then the bird flies into Richland that's 10 miles away and is feeling sick, so it decides to stall in someone's yard, and then their house cat goes and kills that bird. And then that cat eats that radioactive bird that ate the radioactive grasshoppers on Tuesday. And then it comes in your house and it poops in its litter box. And then who's going to clean the litter box and breathe those particles, I mean, that's how it works. We're talking about atomic energy. We're talking about something so small, so very small, that it can't even be contained. It can go through concrete. It can go through anything.
This is like what's going on in the Fukushima forest. The forest fires over in Fukushima are raging because they can only bring in helicopters. Firefighters can't fight it because that's the most contaminated part of Fukushima. because it's right next to the nuclear power plant. So it's on fire still. So let me ask you this, because somebody told me I was being hysterical. I suggest that people stay in for the next few weeks and let it settle. Don't you think? Like, do you think this is ongoing?
Well, I would say move away. Get the hell out of there. I mean, that's what I had to do. I had to
Yeah,
move
but
away.
what about in the jet stream? See, like with Fukushima spewing out the radioactivity west to east, and then this west to east, I think it's affecting everybody. I mean, the whole North American continent is just glowing. You know what I mean?
Well,
If it was a color, we'd all be that color.
I do agree that we have more citizens with Geiger counters and more readers than ever. I remember when Fukushima happened, it was like a struggle to get readings, and that's when the radcast.com started, and we really, or is it .org? But radcast started, and we started actually reporting what citizens were finding on their counters. So that is happening, and we're seeing a lot of people sharing graphs of spikes in Spokane and Idaho right now. So if that hole did release as much as what Miriam is afraid that it did, then we would be seeing that pattern across the U.S., and it makes sense that they would want to cover it as soon as possible just to stop that from getting people being aware of that happening, because you're right. I mean, when Chernobyl went, we could see that cloud going around the world for months, and exactly with Fukushima. And like Miriam said, when Fukushima happened, it took 3 years to get that information. I remember that on 3/11, I remember them showing us the Geiger counters on the West Coast, and they were all really high. I can't remember what the exact number was, but there was a counter at Hanford, and it was even the highest. And they stopped that counter. They took that counter down because they didn't want people to know that Hanford was already higher than Fukushima just on an everyday basis. So they're smart about that stuff. And they don't want us to have the information. And we are starting to get the information, and we are starting to communicate it better with one another. And so, like Miriam said, all they can do is cover up this. This is just a cover-up. They're just trying to cover their butts. And they just don't want to be accountable.
This is so incredible. You know what, though? It does make sense with all of the statements that have come out and the fact that they're really working hard to make us think, don't worry, it's all fine, perfectly fine. Go back to what you were doing.
But don't forget us in the new budget.
Right, but we need a lot more money now.
Yeah, this is a big problem, and this is going to be very expensive. And so don't you forget us, feds. Because I do
you think that Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell know about this, and Jay Inslee? You think they're all in on it?
I think that they buy into it. They had Veterans for Dads, and they do monuments and stuff for Hanford, and
Patty.
They made Hanford. I don't know if you know, but Hanford's
the national
park. Yeah, that was Cantwell.
Patty Murray did that. That was her dad. He worked there. She's really proud of it.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's what I'm talking
guess
about.
What? We only have 30 seconds left.
Oh my gosh, where did it go?
I know. I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you for your brilliance on thinking outside the box on finding out the truth. So I just want to tell you thank you.
I hate being a skeptic, but you kind of have to be when you get lied to so much.
Yeah, well, put your courage feet on, you guys. Take action. Every voice matters, and really do what you can do to help turn the ship around. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye,
Thanks,
Heidi.
Lonnie.